turned out to be better, not just a change. It was better.
Well, thank God the NFL isn't insecure about moving towards the CFL game, because they've consistently done it for about the last 50 years. Yeah.
Exactly.
Their game looks way more like our game than it did a generation or two ago. They have generally shifted in our direction. Okay. And thank God they're not insecure about that, because the NFL game would be a lot worse.
And we've all seen the games. Like I said, I'm a survivalist. The question I have for you, David, because we don't have a lot of time with you. The idea of these rules now have been put out, right? Do you think there may be backpedaling? There may be some tweaks, some changes to what they came out with, what Stuart Johnson, the commissioner, came out with?
No. I think what part of this is, and it's funny, I've heard people use the term proposed rule changes. These are not proposed. This is done. And that's sort of, I think, the shock of this thing is that when it was announced, it's done. And because, somebody who's covered rules committee before in the CFL, there's a process, right? And there's a rules first meeting, there's another meeting, then there's another meeting, then it goes to the board, then there's a long road to get anything changed in the CFL. And so for Stuart Johnson to come to the podium and say, yeah, here's what we're doing, and all the way, and it's already done. Like the board of governors unanimously approved it. That, I think, was what really, to some people, pissed them off, was that there was not a consultation in this process. There was not, somebody said, I saw somebody X the other day said, well, it should have started with a consultation with the fans, and then the players, and the Players Association, and then the coaches, and the general manager. I said, yeah, you get your rule change by 2167 if you do that.
Yeah.
I'm really. And I think that's something that Stuart Johnson was a good student of history on. But this was all done before it went public, and so there's no I don't say no reason, but there's no leverage anyone has to undo this because it's done. Now, could you convince the commissioner or the board of governors to change some things? I guess you could, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is there has to be some refinement of how these rules are actually going to be applied. And by the way, there aren't that many rule changes, to be honest. It's mostly field dimensions, right? So there's not much to do. The biggest rule change, and the one that's going to need some refinement and where there will be some tweaks, but not necessarily pushback, is on the final 3 minutes, right? Because they've got to figure out, are we getting additional timeouts? What discretion do the officials have? What do they not have? I think there's a lot to be sorted out in the final 3 minutes, and that's going to be in the hands of the rules committee. And that's going to be where you get into the minutia, and the coaches should be making those decisions about how this is going to work. And rules committee is designed to sort of tweak the game and make sure things are going to work. Rules committee is not set up to redesign the field, which is why it didn't go to rules committee. But, ultimately, I think there obviously is a resistance. Peter Diakowski is on X every time I look, organizing something, selling a T-shirt. Nathan Rourke has become sort of the de facto leader of the resistance, and you got all kinds of fans, who are chirping people like me and about how we're ignoring them and the game has disrespected them and they're never going to another CFL game and such and such. I don't think any of it's going to amount to anything, to be honest.
Here's a question for you, the expert. Is football in Canada played the same everywhere?
No, not by any means. I mean, there's 4-down football, I believe, in Quebec and British Columbia at the high school levels. But look, 3-down is our game. And I look, I'm among those who loves both brands of football. And if you honestly, pull me aside off mic and say, what kind of football do you like better? The answer is, I don't know. I like good matchups. I like good matchups. That's NFL or CFL, college football. It doesn't matter. I love it all. The difference to me is not about the rules. It's about a good matchup. I think we still have our game, and here's the thing, okay? I'm going to defer to two people who I work with, who I would say are deeply steadfast in their belief of Canadian rules and have really deep histories, practically and emotionally, with the game. Okay. I'm talking about Dwayne Ford and I'm talking about Glenn Suter. Okay. Listen to what each of them have said. Okay, and again, these guys are as deep in the weeds, in love with Canadian football as you could be. And I think their perspectives on it have been really strong. Dwayne said it in a hit I did for SportsCenter. He said, I grew up in a family of Argos season ticket holders, and in one way or another, the Canadian Football League has paid my bills for the last 35 years. I'm about as invested as somebody could be in this league. That's what he said. And he said, and again, he went to, these are the things that make our game unique. These are the things that matter. These are the things, and he gave his take. And Glenn Suter, who, like, Glenn and I have had arguments before about, Canadian football and things and that. Like, we don't always see eye to eye on things. But I thought what he said on the broadcast the other night was really strong. He said, like, let's stop the fear. I'm paraphrase here, that he basically said, stop the fear about, what's coming, or what you think the CFL has on the agenda, or this. Can we just evaluate what's been done now? Let's look at these changes. Let's live with them. Let's respect the fact that so many of the elements of our game that we cherish have been preserved and are moving forward with the game. And let's see what it looks like. Let's find out, rather than sort of the fear. I think it's a not bad lesson in life sometimes to not always fear something you think is coming, because a lot of times it doesn't, and you spend a lot of time and energy worrying about that. I think that's a good rule for life. Obviously, every situation is different. But what Glenn was saying essentially was, stop and evaluate what you see right now to our game, and not necessarily what you think is coming in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And I picked those two guys out just because I think among the people that I work with, they are probably the most aligned and most devout to the Canadian game. And both of them have had pretty modest, sensible, measured takes on what's going on.
The bottom line I'll say for them is that they both also are very entrenched in minor football.
Sure.
Below the CFL.
Sure.
David Morassutti, I'm going to continue. We're going to continue. Then you and I will be able to talk. David has got to go. So I want to get to these points here. The season thus far in the Canadian Football League, what stands out for you?
I think parity is an overused word in sports generally, but boy, this has been, maybe even Ottawa. Ottawa is always the team that I say this year is just good enough to get beat. Like, it's not they get pounded every week. They play down to their opponent and just manage to lose to good teams and bad teams by the same margin, it feels, every week. I think it's the unpredictability